The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Niccolò Machiavelli. Let's begin with something uncomfortable but necessary. Most people think they want to be leaders, but what they really want is to be liked while in control. Those are two very different things. Leadership is not about being the loudest in the room or the most compassionate. It's not even about having a vision. It's about making choices that carry weight, often alone, often under pressure, and often with no applause. In my experience teaching psychology and studying leadership behavior, I've noticed something predictable. When people feel powerless, they retreat into blame. They default to victim thinking. Why did this happen to me? Why won't they listen? Why is the system unfair? But leadership starts with a different question. Given what I cannot control, what will I do anyway? Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He didn't write The Prince as a guide for tyrants. He wrote it as a manual for surviving a world that does not reward purity, patience, or politeness. He knew that waiting for fairness was a luxury only the powerless could afford. Leaders, on the other hand, had to move in reality, not fantasy. This conversation is not about becoming ruthless. It's about becoming responsible for your choices, your influence, and your impact. If you want to think like a leader and not a victim, it starts by being brutally honest about how power actually works. Number 1. Recognize the seduction of powerlessness. Let's talk about something people rarely admit, even to themselves. Powerlessness feels good. That might sound strange at first, but think about it. When you say, "It wasn't my fault," or "There was nothing I could do," you are not just explaining what happened. You are also absolving yourself. You are giving yourself permission to stop trying, and in that moment, it feels like relief. Psychologically, this is called learned helplessness, a concept first studied by Martin Seligman in the 1960s. When people or animals are repeatedly exposed to situations where their actions have no effect, they eventually stop trying altogether, even when change becomes possible. This isn't just about trauma, it's about the mental habit of surrender. Now mix that with modern culture. Today, being seen as a victim often brings attention, empathy, and even moral superiority. The more wounded you are, the more justified you become in staying stuck. This is what I call the seduction of powerlessness. It whispers, "You've done enough, you don't need to fight, the world owes you now." And for many, that becomes more tempting than change. But here's the catch. You can't be a victim and a leader at the same time. The two are psychologically incompatible. A leader says, "I may not control everything, but I will influence what I can." That mindset is uncomfortable. It means facing hard truths about yourself. It means owning your part in the mess, even when others were worse. Machiavelli, though often misunderstood as cold or ruthless, actually understood this dynamic well. He knew that power is not given. It is taken through clear thought and deliberate action. And those who wait to be granted power or fairness are choosing to stay on the sidelines. Take this real-life example. 2 employees are laid off during a company restructure. One blames management, the market, the system, and spends the next year angry and paralyzed. The other says, "This is brutal, but what skills can I sharpen? What angle haven't I tried?" That second person is not pretending the system is fair. They are simply refusing to hand over their agency. So ask yourself, what payoff are you getting from powerlessness? Because until you answer that honestly, you'll never really choose to lead. Number 2, master your inner court before the outer one. Let's be honest. Most people want to lead others before they've learned to lead themselves. They want authority, influence, maybe even admiration. But their inner world is in complete disorder. They're ruled by insecurity, by ego, by the fear of being exposed, and it shows. You can fake confidence for a while, but sooner or later, your inner chaos leaks into your decisions. You start leading from anxiety instead of clarity. Machiavelli understood something that modern psychology now confirms. You can't lead the outer world until you rule your inner one. His idea of power was not just about politics, it was about discipline of the self. In The Prince, he warns rulers not just of their enemies, but of their own weaknesses. The things that destroy leaders are rarely external. It's the blind spots pride, paranoia, emotional reactivity that take them down. In psychology, Carl Jung talked about the shadow, the hidden part of ourselves we deny or ignore. If you don't deal with your shadow, it will show up in your leadership. You'll project your fears onto others. You'll see threats where there are none. You'll make decisions just to protect your ego, not to solve the problem. Here's an example. A manager feels disrespected by a junior employee who challenges their idea. Instead of considering the feedback, the manager lashes out, shuts it down, and labels the employee difficult. Why? Not because the idea was wrong, but because the manager never learned to sit with criticism without feeling personally attacked. That's not leadership. That's emotional immaturity hiding behind a title. To master your inner court means becoming brutally self-aware. It means asking hard questions like, what am I afraid of? Where does my need for control come from? Why do I need to be liked so badly? These are not feel-good questions, but they're necessary. Because until you learn to govern your own thoughts, reactions, and desires, you'll never hold real power. You'll always be chasing validation or trying to cover your emotional wounds with authority. A true leader doesn't just manage a team. They manage their own inner kingdom, with discipline, honesty, and courage. Because if your inner court is in chaos, your outer world eventually will be too, every time. Number 3. Control the narrative or be a pawn in someone else's. Let's get something straight. People don't follow facts. They follow stories. You can have the best idea, the most truth, even solid proof. But if you don't control the narrative, someone else will tell the story for you, and they'll tell it in a way that suits them, not you. That's why one of the most important things a leader can learn is how to shape perception, not in a manipulative or dishonest way, but with intention. Because reality isn't what actually happened, it's what people believe happened. And beliefs are built on stories. This isn't just philosophy. Psychology backs it up. Humans are meaning-making creatures. Our brains are wired to organize facts into narratives. It helps us understand the world and decide who to trust. If you don't actively shape the story around your work, your values, or your leadership, you leave a blank space. And someone will fill that space, usually with assumptions, gossip, or their own version of the truth. Look at politics. Two people can witness the exact same event and walk away with totally opposite conclusions. Not because they saw something different, but because they heard a different story about it. That's how powerful narrative is. Even in day-to-day life, the same rule applies. Say you're quiet in a meeting. If you don't define what that means, maybe you're thinking deeply or observing, someone else might decide you're disinterested, unsure, or arrogant. That interpretation becomes the narrative, and once it's out there, it shapes how people treat you. Machiavelli understood this long before social media. He knew that leaders must craft their legend, not just react to whatever people say. A leader uses story to unify people, to rally support, and to protect their image when times get tough. Victims wait to be understood. Leaders make themselves understood, clearly and deliberately. So ask yourself, what story are people telling about you right now? And more importantly, did you write it? Or did you leave that power in someone else's hands? Control the narrative or be edited out of your own story, because once someone else holds the pen, you're just a character in their plot. Number 4. Embrace the weight of responsibility, not the illusion of fairness. Let's face it. Most people spend their lives waiting for fairness. They believe that if they work hard, follow the rules, and treat others well, life will reward them. It's a comforting belief, and it feels just. But it's also a trap. Because the truth is, the world isn't fair, and never has been. Good people lose, liars win. Effort doesn't always equal outcome. That doesn't mean we give up on ethics or justice. It means we stop expecting life to operate like a math equation. Leaders understand this. Victims don't. Psychologically, the need for fairness is deeply rooted. From childhood, we're taught that fairness is how the world should work. But as adults, clinging to that belief too tightly leads to paralysis. People freeze when unfair things happen. They take it personally. They think, this isn't supposed to happen to me, and that moral outrage becomes a distraction from action. Leadership begins the moment you let go of that illusion. Not in a bitter way, but in a clear-eyed, strategic way. You say, this shouldn't have happened, but it did. Now what? That's power. That's maturity. That's reality-based thinking. Philosophers like Nietzsche pointed this out long ago. He argued that constantly appealing to fairness keeps people weak. It turns them inward, making them resentful and passive. Machiavelli took it a step further. He said a ruler must be willing to do what works, not what feels fair. Not because he enjoyed cruelty, but because he understood that real responsibility means working with the world as it is, not how we wish it would be. Take an example from business. Two colleagues are up for a promotion. One is more qualified. The other plays politics better and gets the role. The qualified one spends months stewing, gossiping, even quitting. The other says, lesson learned. Next time I'll play the game better. That second person isn't endorsing unfairness. They're choosing strategy over indignation. To embrace responsibility means owning your response to everything, even when it's not your fault. That's what separates leaders from the rest. Leaders don't wait for fairness. They adapt, they act. They carry the weight of reality without complaint, because they know power's never handed out, it's claimed. It's number 5. Turn pain into calculation, not catharsis. Pain is inevitable. Everyone goes through disappointment, betrayal, rejection, and failure. But what separates a leader from a victim is what they do with that pain. Most people look for relief. They want to vent, cry, be heard, and be told that they were right and the world was wrong. And that's human. But if that's where the process stops, nothing changes. That's not healing, that's stalling. A leader, on the other hand, does something very different. They feel the pain, but instead of drowning in it, they study it. They break it down. They ask, why did this happen? What did I miss? What patterns are repeating? Who benefits from my reaction right now? That's not cold, that's intelligent. It's strategic reflection, and it's one of the most underrated leadership tools out there. Psychologically, this approach is rooted in what's called cognitive reappraisal. It's a technique used in therapy where people learn to reinterpret a painful event through a lens of meaning or growth, rather than simply reliving the emotional blow. But leaders go a step further. They don't just reframe, they analyze. Pain becomes information. Betrayal becomes a map. Loss becomes instruction. Think about someone who's been betrayed in a business partnership. The average person might spiral, post about it online, rally people to their side, and spend months seeking closure that never really comes. A leader takes a different route. They go quiet, observe, investigate. They learn what signs they missed. They protect their future deals, and they return, not with a wound, but with a weapon. Machiavelli would argue that emotional release, while sometimes necessary, should never replace action. Catharsis might feel powerful in the moment, but it doesn't move the needle. It doesn't solve the problem. In fact, too much focus on emotional relief can blind you to what the experience was actually trying to teach you. Pain is expensive, so don't just feel it, use it. Let it sharpen your perception. Let it increase your standards. Let it show you what you'll never tolerate again. And above all, let it remind you that every scar you carry can either be a warning to retreat or a lesson to lead with more precision. Leaders choose the second, every time. Number 6, be feared before you are loved, but never hated without cause. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. Being liked is overrated. Most people spend their lives trying to be liked, to avoid conflict, to make everyone feel comfortable. And on the surface, that looks noble. But underneath, it's often rooted in fear, the fear of rejection, the fear of being seen as too much, the fear of being alone. Here's the truth. You can't lead effectively if your first need is to be liked. People don't follow leaders because they're friendly. They follow them because they're competent, decisive, and unshakable. Respect comes first. Affection might come later. But if you flip the order, if you try to be loved before you're respected, you will be walked over. And when it's no longer convenient to like you, people will drop you fast. This idea goes back to Machiavelli, who famously said it is safer to be feared than loved. He wasn't talking about cruelty, he was talking about predictability. When people fear disappointing you, when they know your boundaries are firm and your standards are high, they behave differently. They take you seriously. And strangely, that often leads to deeper respect, even admiration. In psychology, this links to the concept of authoritative presence. Not authoritarian, not aggressive, but grounded. Leaders who have it speak calmly, but firmly. They don't need to raise their voice. People adjust themselves automatically in their presence. Why? Because their energy signals, I know who I am, I'm not here to please you. Let's take a workplace example. A manager who always tries to be the cool boss may avoid giving honest feedback. They laugh off disrespect, they ignore red flags. Over time, their team grows chaotic and respect erodes. Another manager sets clear expectations, holds people accountable, and stays emotionally steady. They're not everyone's favorite, but the team thrives. That second manager will outlast the first, every time. Now, a warning. Being feared is not the same as being hated. Hated leaders are unpredictable, cruel, or self-serving. That kind of power never lasts. But fear that comes from respect, from knowing you stand for something, that's durable. So ask yourself, are people respecting you or just tolerating you because you're agreeable? A leader who's feared for the right reasons doesn't chase affection. They build authority, and love, if it comes, is earned, not begged for. Number 7, never reveal the full depth of your wounds. In today's culture, vulnerability is often praised as a sign of strength. And yes, sharing your story, your struggles, your wounds can create connection. But let's be honest, there's a limit, and leaders need to know exactly where that limit is. Here's the hard truth. Revealing too much makes you predictable, and predictable people are easy to control. When others know exactly what hurts you, what throws you off, what makes you question yourself, they now hold a map to your weak spots, and not everyone will use that map kindly. In psychology, this ties to the concept of emotional boundaries. These boundaries aren't just for protecting yourself from others, they are for protecting your influence. Oversharing may feel brave, but it can quietly erode your authority. It shifts focus from your leadership to your emotional wounds. You stop being the person people look up to and start being the person they feel sorry for. Machiavelli, who never romanticized human nature, would argue that people admire strength more than honesty. Not because they're cruel, but because they need to believe the person leading them is stable. If you pull back the curtain too far and reveal the chaos, people start to doubt. Even if they sympathize, they may not trust your judgment when it counts. Take this example. Imagine a CEO telling their company, "I've been so anxious lately, I can barely think straight. I cry most mornings. I don't know if I'm the right person for this anymore." That's honest. That's vulnerable. But it also creates panic. It's not leadership. It's a confession. A leader can say, "This is a difficult season, but I'm focused, I'm learning, and I have a plan." That's still real, but it protects stability. There's also a social truth here. Victims tend to overshare in hopes of being validated. They want others to see their pain and say, "You're right, you've been through so much." That kind of emotional exposure can become addictive. But validation is not power, it's comfort. And comfort is not what builds influence. A true leader knows when to speak and when to withhold. They reveal just enough to build connection, but never so much that they lose control of the room. Your wounds may shape you, but you don't owe them to everyone. Keep some parts sacred. Let mystery work in your favor. Because once the whole world knows what breaks you, someone will eventually use it. Number 8, tame your empathy or it will be weaponized against you. Let's talk about empathy, the golden virtue of our time. Everyone wants to be seen as empathetic. It makes you seem kind, morally awake, emotionally intelligent. But here's what most people don't understand. Empathy without boundaries is a liability. And if you're not careful, it will be used against you. At its core, empathy is the ability to feel what someone else is feeling. It builds connection, trust, and emotional safety. All good things. But if left unchecked, empathy can turn into emotional submission. You begin absorbing other people's moods, needs, and pain to the point where their suffering becomes your command. You stop leading and start reacting. You make decisions out of guilt instead of clarity. Psychologists call this empathic distress, when you take on someone else's emotions so deeply that you lose perspective. And here's where it gets dangerous. Not everyone who pulls on your empathy deserves it. Some people use their pain like a spotlight, drawing you in, playing the victim, appealing to your conscience, not for healing, but for control. And the more sensitive you are, the more vulnerable you become. Leaders don't ignore empathy, they control it. They learn to feel what others feel without being ruled by it. They set emotional limits. They know when to listen and when to step back. They can look someone in the eye and say, "I understand how hard this is for you, but here's the decision." That's not cold, that's clear. Machiavelli would agree. He understood that a ruler who tries to please everyone, who cannot tolerate others being upset with him, becomes weak. Not because kindness is bad, but because power diluted by guilt becomes servitude. A leader must carry empathy like a tool, not wear it like a chain. Consider this example. A team member constantly underperforms, but always has a tragic story. They pull at the heartstrings, and the leader keeps excusing them, while the rest of the team loses faith. The work suffers, morale drops. That's not compassion. That's emotional manipulation dressed as virtue. Victims drown in empathy and call it being good. Leaders know that being truly good sometimes means saying no, holding the line, and choosing respect over comfort. So ask yourself, is your empathy making you wise or making you weak? Because when it's not trained, someone will use it against you. Number 9. See betrayal as inevitable, not exceptional. Let's cut through the fantasy. Betrayal is not rare, it's routine. People will disappoint you. Some will lie to your face, take what they need, and walk away without blinking. This isn't a glitch in the system, it is the system. And the sooner you stop treating betrayal as some shocking event, the sooner you start thinking like a real leader. Most people take betrayal personally. They think, how could they do this to me? I was loyal, I was kind, I gave them everything. That reaction is emotional, understandable, and deeply unhelpful. It turns you into a victim. You become consumed by the drama of it. You lose time, energy, and perspective trying to make sense of it all. And meanwhile, the damage continues. Leaders, on the other hand, expect betrayal. Not in a paranoid or bitter way, but in a practical one. They understand that human loyalty is conditional. People are loyal to their needs, not yours. If those needs change, their loyalty shifts. That doesn't make them monsters. It just makes them human. And if you lead without factoring that in, you're not leading, you're wishing. Philosophers like Seneca and Machiavelli both wrote about this. Seneca, the Stoic, believed that to be caught off guard by human nature is a failure of study, not morality. Machiavelli was more blunt. He said a ruler must be prepared to see allies turn to enemies and friends shift alliances when it suits them. The wise leader sees it coming. The naive one calls it betrayal. Take an example from real life. A co-founder suddenly exits a business and takes half the clients. One partner is devastated, spirals, and refuses to trust anyone again. The other partner already had contingencies, backup plans, legal protections. They absorb the hit, adapt, and move on stronger. That's not heartless. That's prepared. Betrayal doesn't need to destroy you, unless you've built your identity on the illusion that it could never happen. Real leaders don't take betrayal as a personal insult. They treat it like a weather pattern. It comes, it stings, and then it passes, if you're ready for it. So stop asking why it happened. Start asking what it taught you. Because betrayal is inevitable. But being unprepared for it, that's a choice. Number 10. Use fear as a signal, not a destination. Fear gets a bad reputation. Most people treat it like a warning to stop, to back away, to play it safe. But fear isn't the enemy, it's information. And leaders don't run from information. They examine it. Think of fear as a flashlight. It points straight at the thing you haven't mastered yet, that presentation you keep delaying, that conversation you avoid, that move you've been thinking about for years. Fear lives there because something important is at stake. Power, identity, reputation, control. Victims see that signal and freeze. Leaders see it and lean in. Psychologically, fear triggers the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. It tells you something could go wrong here, but it doesn't tell you whether the threat is real or imagined. That's where self-awareness comes in. Leaders learn to pause and investigate. They ask, what exactly am I afraid will happen? Whose judgment am I trying to avoid? What outcome am I assuming without evidence? That level of inquiry turns raw fear into usable data. Philosophers like Kierkegaard and even Nietzsche understood this deeply. They saw fear as a gateway, not a prison. Kierkegaard called it the dizziness of freedom, the anxiety we feel when we stand on the edge of our own potential. Most people step back. Leaders step forward. Here's a real example. A rising executive avoids public speaking. They say it's not their strength, but beneath that is a fear of being seen, of being judged, of not being perfect. If they obey that fear, their growth stalls. If they study it, rehearse, prepare, and still walk on stage, they gain not just a skill, but self-command. Victims obey fear and call it self-preservation, but that's survival mode, not leadership. Leadership begins where comfort ends, and fear is often the border. So use fear as a signal, a diagnostic tool. Let it show you where you need more skill, more preparation, or more courage. But never let it decide the outcome for you. Fear is a map, one with red circles drawn around your biggest leverage points. Study those circles, strategize, then move. Because if fear becomes your master, leadership will always stay just out of reach. Number 11. Curate your alliances like weapons in an arsenal. Most people build relationships like they're collecting souvenirs, based on how someone makes them feel in the moment. Leaders do something different. They curate. Every person in their orbit serves a purpose. Every alliance is intentional, not cold, not heartless, just clear. This doesn't mean treating people like disposable objects. It means recognizing the strategic function of human connection. In leadership, every relationship is either strengthening your position or weakening it. Most victims don't see this. They surround themselves with people who validate them, flatter them, agree with them, and drain them. It feels good temporarily, but when pressure hits, those same people vanish or collapse. Leaders, by contrast, think in terms of function. Who challenges me to think sharper? Who brings access, insight, or reach? Who has skills I lack? Who is loyal under pressure, not just when it's convenient? These are not selfish questions. They are essential ones. Because in any serious pursuit, your alliances either scale your power or scatter your energy. Philosophically, this mirrors Machiavelli's view of court politics. He argued that a prince must keep his advisors close, not just because of loyalty, but because of use. A good advisor keeps a ruler grounded. A strong general secures the realm. A weak or emotional ally becomes a liability. Machiavelli never said trust no one. He said trust the right ones and watch them constantly. Psychologically, this aligns with the concept of social capital, the value embedded in your network. Victims see relationships as emotional safe zones. Leaders see them as bridges, mirrors, and sometimes shields. They also know when to cut ties. Dead weight is dead weight, no matter how familiar it feels. Here's a concrete example. A founder has two close friends involved in her startup. One is brilliant, but honest to a fault. The other is fun, supportive, and endlessly reassuring. Under pressure, the second one avoids hard decisions and gets in the way. The first one pushes back, challenges the plan, and drives growth. A victim keeps both. A leader makes the hard cut and keeps the one who makes her stronger, not just safer. Your alliances define your access to power. Choose them like you would weapons in an arsenal, not based on sentiment, but based on their ability to win the fight. Number 12. Be willing to appear cruel to preserve greater order. We live in a culture that worships kindness, but not all kindness is good and not all cruelty is evil. This is a brutal truth most people are not prepared to accept, but leadership demands that you do. Because when you're responsible for outcomes, not just feelings, you will be forced to make decisions that look cruel from the outside, but preserve greater order on the inside. Let's go straight to the point. Sometimes firing someone is kinder to the mission than keeping them around and damaging the whole team. Sometimes saying no to a person in pain is more responsible than saying yes out of guilt. Sometimes holding the line even when people are begging you to soften, is exactly what keeps everything from falling apart. This is where leaders separate themselves from victims. Victims seek emotional absolution. Leaders seek clarity and results. Machiavelli addressed this paradox head-on in The Prince. He argued that a ruler must be willing to appear cruel if that cruelty preserves stability, security, or justice. He wasn't celebrating sadism, he was rejecting fantasy. Because when you're in a position of power, you're not just managing emotions, you're managing systems, consequences, and long-term survival. Psychologically, this relates to moral flexibility. The ability to make decisions based on context, not rigid absolutes. It also requires a strong internal locus of control. Leaders who make hard choices and can stand behind them even when others disapprove are operating from a place of strength. Victims, by contrast, collapse under the guilt of upsetting others. They confuse being liked with being right, and over time, that weakness spreads. Consider a real-world example, a school principal who expels a popular student for repeated bullying. Parents complain. The community pushes back, but the decision protects the vulnerable and upholds the school's integrity. It feels cruel, but in truth, it restores order and sends a message that boundaries matter more than popularity. If you need every hard choice to look kind, you'll betray your duty. And if you need everyone's approval to sleep at night, leadership will break you. So the question isn't, do I look cruel? The question is, am I preserving something larger than myself? Because true leadership isn't about appearing good. It's about holding the structure together when no one else can, even if it hurts, even if it haunts you. In final words, it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Niccolò Machiavelli. This quote isn't about cruelty, it's about clarity. It's about understanding how people actually behave, not how we wish they would. And that's the entire point of thinking like a leader rather than a victim. Victim thinking feels safe because it makes the world simple. Someone else is always the problem. You get to be right. You get sympathy. You get to keep your hands clean. But here's the trade-off. You also give up control. Victims wait for fairness, for permission, for rescue. Leaders do not. To think like a leader means stepping into the dirt of reality. It means understanding that power is always in motion, that loyalty is conditional, and that influence depends on timing, not good intentions. This doesn't mean you become manipulative. It means you grow up. It means you develop range. You learn when to be warm and when to be steel. You stop treating morality like a security blanket and start treating it like a compass, one that adjusts to terrain. Psychologically, this is what separates reactive minds from strategic ones. Victims live in reaction. They take everything personally. Leaders create distance between the feeling and the action. They use their mind like a command center, not a mirror. And Machiavelli wasn't trying to corrupt anyone. He was trying to prepare you. The world doesn't bend to ideals. It bends to those who know how to read it, adapt to it, and move within it without losing themselves. So if you want to lead, truly lead, stop waiting to feel ready. Stop needing to be understood. Stop chasing moral perfection and start asking better questions. What does this situation actually require of me? Where is the real leverage? What am I afraid to see? The truth is, you don't become a leader the moment you get a title or a team. You become a leader the moment you stop needing the world to be fair and start learning how to move through it anyway. That's the difference. That's the edge. That's how you stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a ruler. Thank you for watching, and see you in another episode.